Hello again. Welcome everyone to our Art Science Professional Development session hosted by Organisé par MEOPAR and the Ocean Decade Community of Practice. We'll add a link into the chat with more information about the Community of Practice shortly. Nous sommes ravis que des chercheurs en provenance de Turtle Island nous rejoignent aujourd'hui and across not just Canada as well, but an international audience. So thank you so much for joining us. Je m'appelle Alexa Goodman, gestionnaire du programme de formation de MEOPAR et j'utilise les pronoms she, they. Je suis votre host aujourd'hui et j'anime la à partir de Kijibuktuk dans Mi'kmaq, connu sur le nom de Halifax, Nouvelle-Écosse. To get a sense of our reach today, we encourage you to share the ancestral territory of the location that you are logging in from in the chat. And if you aren't familiar, you can check out native-land.ca to learn about the territory that you reside on. So before we dive in, we'll just review some quick housekeeping items. If we could change the slide, that would be great. Most of you are probably well-versed with Zoom etiquette at this point, but just in case, we have some reminders. So we want to ensure that this is an open and safe environment, so please be respectful when others are sharing their thoughts and ideas. To ensure an optimal experience for people with limited bandwidth, we ask that you stay on mute and keep your video off for today's session. During the larger group discussion, you're more than welcome to use the raise hand function, turning on your audio, ask your question once we call on you. I'll be keeping track of the chat box while the discussion is going. So if you have any questions about the session or technical challenges, just pop them in there. I'll be sure to check them out. And we strongly encourage you to use the reaction buttons at the bottom of your screen as a way of engaging with us throughout the discussion today. And one last thing, please add your pronouns and your organizational affiliation if you would like into your Zoom name. You can do that by clicking the three buttons or the three little dots on the bottom of your screen that says more. And with that, this session is being recorded. So if you don't want your name to be exposed, you can go ahead and remove that as well. So just so you're aware of what's coming down the pipes for the rest of the session, we're going to have some opening remarks from our fantastic facilitator, Sam. Then we'll move into the discussion and question period, and then we'll wrap things up. So it'll be a quick session today. But with that, it's now my pleasure to introduce our facilitator, Samantha Jones. Sam's a poet, a parent, outdoor enthusiast, PhD candidate in the Department of Geography at the University of Calgary, where the research focuses on inorganic carbon cycling in a connected lake river coastal ecosystem in Gantuit, Cambridge Bay, Nunavut. To no coincidence, I first learned about Sam's work by reading her poem on ocean acidification, which was first published in Watch Your Head, then developed into a multimedia clip, science and policy and partners included in the virtual ocean pavilion at COP26. Some of her other science poetries have been published in Geohumanities, and over the last year, we've been working with Sam under the Ocean Decade COP to facilitate our art science programming with the network. So with that, I'm going to pass the virtual mic over to Sam to kick things off. Over to you.
Thank you so much. I so appreciate being able to do this session today. I think we're going to have a fantastic conversation, science, art, interdisciplinary work, generating ideas, thinking about how we can play with our own work and data and look at things in a new and different way. So I'm going to start by introducing our panelists. We have a pretty stacked lineup today. You're going to see folks with different backgrounds calling in from different locations and speaking to different types of research, academic work, community work, artistic practices. And we're going to touch on a lot of really interesting topics. So the way that I'm going to run the session is to read some information and showcase some of the accomplishments of each of our panelists. And then we're going to move into our organic conversation where you'll get to see us talking. We'll have some general questions that are going to go around the circle of panelists. And then we'll have some more targeted questions that really delve into the details of what the different folks are working on. And then we're also going to incorporate audience questions. So when you registered for the event, some folks may have submitted questions ahead of time. And so we've compiled those. There were many, so we can't touch on all of them, unfortunately, but we did pull out themes and try to curate the questions that we have to address some of those points. And then you will be able to ask questions here live as the discussion is evolving. So please feel free to put those in the Q&A or the chat. Alexa is going to collect those and send them over to me a bit later in the session. So think about that as we move through the hour today. So we're going to get started right away because we don't have very much time, and we could have our session with everyone. So we want to use this opportunity to get the most of the session. So we're going to speak today with Dr. Jenna Butler, Naomi Bird, Brittany Schaefer, and Jen McLatchie. So we'll go first through the bios. Dr. Jenna Butler is an award-winning Canadian poet, essayist, and editor located in Treaty 6. Jenna Butler is the author of 3 books of poetry, Seldom Seen Road, Wells, and Aphelion, a collection of ecological essays, A Profession of Hope, Farming on the Edge of the Grizzly Trail, and the Arctic travelogue, Magnetic North, Sea Voyage to Svalbard. Her newest book, Reverie, A Year of Bees, essays about beekeeping, climate, grief, and trauma recovery, was a finalist for the 2021 Governor General's Literary Award in Nonfiction. Butler is a retired professor of creative and environmental writing and an off-grid organic farmer in Treaty 6. As we go through the slides here, you'll see that there are some links and some socials. You're going to get those in a follow-up email, and you can also go to the website for this event and access those materials as well. So these are some of the highlights that Dr. Butler provided to us. Next up, we have Naomi Bird, who is an educational consultant, W2SA educational consultant, and a Master's of Education student at the University of Saskatchewan, located in Treaty 6, Saskatoon. Naomi Bird is a two-spirit Nahitha person. They completed a double major in sustainability and urban planning at Dalhousie University and are currently working on a master's in land-based Indigenous education. Naomi is an educational consultant for the Wabanaki Two-Spirit Alliance and sits on the National Two-Spirit Youth Council. Their research interests include 2SQ health, identity, and trauma-informed pedagogy. In their free time, Naomi likes to bead, watch Netflix, and can be usually found at the local climbing gym. Thank you so much, Naomi, for joining us. Here are some examples of highlights that Naomi has provided, and you can check out their socials for some of the artwork as well. Brittany Schaefer is the project manager for the Civic Laboratory for Environmental Action Research, the Clear Lab at Memorial University, calling in from the Dish with One Spoon territory. Brittany is a social scientist interested in human-environment relations and ways of doing science better, specifically interdisciplinary collaborations and feminist approaches to knowledge production. And she's the project manager for CLEAR. So thank you so much for joining us. And the next slide shows some of the highlights, including a knowledge quote that Brittany provided to us. And last but not least, Jennifer McLatchie, an artist, kayak instructor, and interdisciplinary PhD candidate at Dalhousie University, calling in from Mi'kma'ki. Jennifer McLatchie uses emergent arts-based methods to engage with marine debris as a way of enacting an ethics of care in the current moment of climate crisis and mass extinction. She looks to plastic waste as artifacts of Anthropocene delusions that tell stories of the inextricable interconnectedness of every part of the living world. She works to enact material responsibility by transforming this abundant, durable, and versatile material resource from its destructive state as trash adrift in the oceans to a constructive state as a material collaborator toward the ends of building livable future worlds. Working with marine plastic as a material for mending tears in the web of life, she works towards imagining and then building post-Anthropocene life-sustaining multi-species entanglement. Thank you so much, Jen, for joining us. Here's some wonderful images you can look at here. So with that, we're going to move to a more conversational gallery view. So you can see all of us having a discussion here. So we will just take a moment to get that sorted, and we're going to dive right in. Okay, wonderful. I'm seeing all the videos turning on. Perfect. And I think as we're speaking, they're going to pin us and move us around so you have an optimal view of the discussion here. So we're going to kick this discussion off, just easing into the topic, getting to know each other, thinking about where we're working and, starting to make some connections. So I'd like to start by asking all of the panelists to, in a few sentences, describe either their art practice or how they interact with creative work or art, and then talk a little bit about the intersections between that creative piece and other aspects of their lives, whether that be work, research, community, and so on. So I think we will start with Brittany on that question.
Thank you so much, Sam. I'm so happy to be here. My role is a little bit different because I am not an artist myself. I am a social scientist, so I'll be speaking more generally about the CLEAR Lab and what we do there. So I'm the project manager for CLEAR, and although I'm here to represent the lab, I can only speak from my own experiences, and I'm not always speaking on behalf of CLEAR. CLEAR stands for the Civic Laboratory for Environmental Action Research. It's a feminist, anti-colonial, interdisciplinary lab that's dedicated to good land relations. It's based out of MUN, Memorial University in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador. And we foreground our value of good land relations in all of our projects, from community-based plastic pollution monitoring to our Artist in Residency program. So the Artist in Residence program, for that, we hire artists to join the lab as full members, and they join in on the collective goal of creating methods and protocols based in equity, humility, a sense of place, and anti-colonial justice. So the strength of this program, and also what makes it unique to some other artist residencies, is that the artists aren't siloed into a separate studio or their own room or something. They're hired on as full lab members who undergo the same onboarding as members who are processing some of the plastic samples or some of the samples of the animal guts in search of plastics. So part of being a radically interdisciplinary lab means that we don't keep art and science separate and then stitch them together at the end. Instead, it's always a collective process, and it's a process that's intentional, that supports artists, and also doesn't expect artists to be things they're not, like fluent in science. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And Naomi, I think I'll pass it over to you next if you want to make some comments.
Sure. Yeah, I think when I first was asked to be on this panel, I felt a little bit out of place, almost like a bit of an imposter. And I think we'll be touching on that a bit later, this idea of like being an artist, but like maybe not holding that title like right away. So for me, I'm in my second year of a master's program, just starting my proposal and like getting down to research. I work for the W2SA. I've had a few different roles with them over the last few years, and finished an undergrad, I guess, a year and a half ago at Dalhousie. So when I first was thinking about like artistic practice, I'm thinking a lot about my beadwork that I like taught myself how to do beadwork, and also I've added a lot of kind of like creative writing to my work. You don't see that really in the super academic articles that I've co-authored, but for my undergrad thesis, I did an autoethnography. And at the time that was really rooted in Indigenous methodologies and thinking about like standpoint theory and how like I can't really speak for my community, like I can only really share my own voice. But this has been something I had been kind of incorporating in my work like throughout undergrad. I just didn't have a specific framework to explain it. And I've continued to do that in my work in university. I had the program I'm doing right now, we do a lot of things online, and then we'll meet in like the spring and summer to do like land-based like intensive courses. And one of our, I guess, assignments on the land involved just like sitting out for 20 minutes with one of our classmates and creating a poem, and a lot of people really struggled with this, and I found it like quite not easy. It's never like that easy to write a poem, but I found it like more in line with what I'm used to doing, like speaking poetically and then like wrapping in the more academic ideas. I think for me, I find a lot of academia can be very like abstracted and almost like not always like intelligible, I guess, by our like communities that we're trying to help, at least for me as like a social like science researcher, thinking about a lot of like community-based things. So I think writing in a way that's accessible and like understandable to people we're speaking about and like for is like really important. I guess I don't want to go too much over. Yeah, I will say, I guess, just to close, that I feel like art was never something that I thought I was super good at. I do it a lot just in class, and I've been realizing like a new ADHD diagnosis that I was doing that just to have multiple like stimulations, and so I would focus. But my art was like different than everyone else's, and I was like, oh, these like little doodles they're not very good. And I just was like, oh, I'm good at writing, I'm good at these things, like went down that path and slowly have been doing little artistic things and seeing them kind of go into my practice. So I think I'm still early on in how all of those things can work. And I'll show one example of something that I think is cool a little bit later, but I think that's all I'll say for now.
That's wonderful. And yeah, I really appreciate the idea of, you know, having to sit with things and maybe there's this empty space and how we need to give ourselves that empty space to allow creativity to happen, whether that's in our art or in our science. And often when we're rushing around, you know, between events and all of these things, like we don't have that empty space. So how can we perhaps protect that? And then not just do that alone, but, you know, like in that experience, we were talking about sitting with someone else and just being and creating something together. And definitely we'll come back to the identity piece, because I think, you know, when we're living in these spaces where we might be an academic, we might be an artist, we might be a scientist, we might be many other things, and we're asked like, oh, describe yourself or give me this bio. It's like, what do we focus on or what do we bring up, and what are we afraid to say and what do we leave out and why do we do that? So yeah, that could be an entire panel on its own. So we will definitely come back to that. I think we will pass it over to Jenna Butler. I see you there if you want to take it away next.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm a writer, and I have just stepped back from a number of years of teaching, 20 years in the classroom teaching creative writing and environmental humanities. And the other part of my life that is part of my creative practice and kind of the lived creative practice, I guess, in a way, is working on the land as an off-grid organic farmer with my husband up in the bush in Northern Treaty 6. And so part of my artistic practice is kind of a braided practice. It's working with the land and with the diverse communities that my husband and I are part of up here. It's observing the land, it's providing food for our communities, it's writing. A lot of my nonfiction and quite a bit of my poetry looks at what that experience of living in place and observing place through the seasons and talking to different communities and their experiences of place. That's a lot of my creative writing, and then bringing that into the classroom. So researching in the environmental humanities, ecopoetics particularly. And I find that a big part of my creative practice is actually bringing the creative and bringing the land into the classroom with my students and talking about their diverse experiences of place. I've been long very interested in BIPOC experiences of land and land access. So I find making space and holding space for those discussions with my students, particularly a focal part of my creative practice. So now, having just stepped back from teaching and stepped more fully into my space as an organic farmer, as a provider of food for my community, and as a writer, I'm finding those roles shifting, but they're always kind of braided together in my practice. So in a nutshell.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I love the idea of, you know, bringing the land into the classroom. I think, you know, just from the three answers we've got so far, and we have another one coming up, you can see that there are sort of these repeating themes, taking space, taking time, being in a place, being on the land. How do we generate ideas? How do we make connection? And I think, for some scientists, you're working outside, you might be doing field work, you might be traveling. Other scientists might be more doing something computer-based or lab-based, and maybe it doesn't have the same access to the outside. So how can we think about bringing in those connections to a space that might be completely indoors or in a lab or even digital only? And how do we sort of bring those elements in, braid them together, and think about connection to the land or to place, and how that can sort of spur new ways of looking at things. So I will pass it over to Jen to comment on this first question as well.
Thank you. Thank you all for organizing this panel and for having me. It's a really important discussion. I have a similar perspective to what others have said, that my art practice isn't so much a separate part of my life that then gets sewn together with other parts afterwards. It's throughout everything. My academic research uses arts-based methodology. So the art practice is the method. It's a mode of being creative in the world and creative experimentation. And so sometimes it's about the resulting art object, but not always. That's not the most important part. Like sometimes I make a thing, but most often it might, to the outside world, just look like I'm being a weirdo playing with plastic garbage. But it's material research, and it's about discovering what stories those items have to tell. Thinking of them as artifacts rather than as this garbage that is a nuisance and we need to get rid of it, which in the context where it is, yes, we do. But looking to those objects as artifacts in order to learn what we can from them and about their journeys in the ocean is something I like to think about. So it's more of a process-based. It's a way of being, a way of exploring. And in terms of community involvement, if I do workshops with community groups, it's to sort of try to convince people to be curious and creative and try to get people to think about things a different way, and to look at this material as, look, free art supplies. You don't have to go to a store to buy art supplies. Garbage is art supplies. It just needs our creativity to be repositioned. Oh, this is Luna, my assistant. She's very helpful. I think that's all. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I love, the emphasis on play. I hope that, folks in the audience here, if you haven't had a chance to look at the workbook that's, connected to this session that's available online, you can check it out and see. It's filled with prompts, and the whole point there is to try to get people to experiment and to play and encourage us. Oftentimes as adults, we lose that not ability to play, but we feel like maybe we're not allowed because we have to, be doing all of these other activities. And so sometimes, though, having that space again to just tinker with things and see what happens can really generate some amazing things. And we do this in both art and science. So I think these skills are transferable no matter what you're working on. And I love that you brought up the idea of, what does this look like from the outside? And, people being like, what are you doing? Like, what are you working on? Like, get back to work, or like whatever. And there's this element of trust almost in the art where it's going to be something. We just need to let it, and, do its thing, or even creating something and then letting it go out into the world, and the work that it does, sort of a different thing than what you've created. It takes on its own, life and purpose, which I also find fascinating. So we're going to now move into some targeted questions that will get into sort of the meat of what everyone's working on. And of course, we want this to be organic and fun. So panelists, please feel free to also, talk to and to each other and to each other's work and comments. And we'll let things sort of grow here. I'm going to start with Jenna. And I'm hoping, because MEOPAR is here and sponsoring this whole thing, you can talk about your sea voyage. I think MEOPAR will be particularly interested in that. Jenna went on a sea voyage to Svalbard and created a wonderful book, Magnetic North, which was my entry point into Jenna's work, which I'm just so thankful for. And then Jenna actually became a mentor for me at the Banff Center. So I'm just really grateful we can share this space again. And so I'll turn it over to you if you want to say a few words about, perhaps what the voyage was like, working within the constraints of the trip, and then what came out of that when you were finished.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. So this is Magnetic North. This is the little tiny slim book of prose poetry that came out of the voyage that I was on. And so this trip took place back in 2014, although it's still kind of living large in my mind, especially as I think about climate crisis and impacts in the North. And this was 16 of us, artists, writers, climate scientists, photographers, composers, choreographers, all crammed onto a barkentine sailing ship up at Svalbard. And we were there for 2 weeks in June over the summer solstice. And our purpose was, through our various projects and our various art forms, to catalog and to record climate change in our various disciplines. And it absolutely hit home powerfully. I mean, we'd all done our research in our own ways back home before we undertook the voyage to Svalbard and the voyage on the boat itself. But what we were observing hit home in a powerful and very visceral way when we were on board the ship. Because we were on a sailing ship with a very shallow draft, we were able to access areas of the archipelago and the islands that you couldn't access aboard a motorized craft. And so we saw areas we were able to get quite close to the glacial facies and watch the calving of the glaciers 24 hours a day over the summer solstice. And it was a surreal experience taking part in creating art, recording climate change in such an amazing landscape and a very threatened landscape. And of course, as an artist and as a person in the world, I was really conflicted even just to undertake this process of traveling to this landscape that was under threat, knowing I would have to undertake, 45 hours of travel, predominantly through aircraft to get there. I might talk about that a little bit later, but so there were 30 people, 16 of us artists and scientists, and then the crew and the polar bear guards, which are a reality when you're up north, crammed into basically 600 square feet of cabin space with 24-hour daylight out in the middle of the ocean where you could not get off the vessel, creating our various projects. And so some of the constraints that came to kind of work on us were things like space. Particularly if we're a writer, it's not so bad. You're used to working in a pretty constrained space anyway. And so writing by hand, particularly because we didn't have power all of the time. We had power when we were underway. And so we had the generators working, but we didn't have power all the time. So plugging in a laptop didn't always work. So I was writing a lot by hand. But for the artists who were used to spreading out and the choreographers who were used to, moving all over the place, suddenly you had 600 square feet. And sometimes we were going through stormy waters, so your space was quite restricted. Solitude, right? And there was no solitude. I don't know if you've spent time on board a boat. You're in everyone's business all the time. And so those of you who have been out in the field, you know what that's like. So if you're looking for solitude for the creative process, you really have to go inward and find ways to do that and still be in company. And for me, seasickness. I had never been seasick in my life until I spent 2 weeks out on the water in Svalbard and spent 24 hours a day seasick. So trying to create under that condition was kind of unexpected, but that factored into the book as well. Like, you don't know what your response is going to be emotionally to a landscape or even physically within a landscape until you get there. And then you're charged with kind of creating art, and you feel impelled to create art because, particularly I found in a space like Svalbard, where you have traveled so far to get there and you are in a landscape under threat, you feel really impelled to create, to produce something, to bring something back to some way to speak to or to legitimize your presence in that place. So I hope I kind of done that a bit of justice. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things that I love is the idea of, writing and poetry specifically as an archive, and the idea that we can be cataloging things that are happening now, but also we can be looking back at poetry that was written decades earlier, even centuries earlier, and see what were the conditions that people are describing in their everyday lives. Like if something's coming up over and over, they're not sort of making that up, or it's not hyperbole for the poem. That's probably a reflection of the world they're living in. So being able to document those things, I think, is really important. And then this idea of not knowing how you're going to respond. I definitely, I've spent time on a vessel, a research vessel, not much time, but going there, I also got seasick just for part of the trip, and another time I wasn't. But I thought, oh, I'm going to do all these things, and then you get there, and sometimes your body won't let you do certain things, and then you end up pivoting to something else that sort of catches your attention. So this flexibility, but also this sort of persistence of I've come all this way. I'm going to try to do something, even if it's not, what I planned or how I laid it all out in my mind. So I think that really nicely transitions into something I wanted to ask Naomi about in terms of thinking about inspiration for works. We talked a little bit before about cultural connections, or also sort of the body of artists or folks around us or before us that bring us inspiration. And so maybe you can talk a little bit to that aspect to add something to sort of the environment inspiring us as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I first started doing beadwork, I was a little bit more focused just on like the practice itself. Like I kind of stayed away from any kind of like sewing type things, just like gender wise, like being told that like that was a very like girly thing to do. I was like, well, I won't do it at all. But kind of coming into my own like gender identity later on in life and kind of pushing past those like norms and like understanding like Indigenous like gender roles and being able to kind of choose or do like what suits you. Started doing more beadwork. So my first designs were a little bit more like basic. I think once I like borrowed a tattoo and like in Illustrator, I just kind of like traced it and made it a little bit different. But my later work, I have a few things here. I don't know how well it's going to show. So I did this like patch. It's like no more stolen kin. Because I saw a lot of like the MMIW pins were a little bit like exclusive. Like it was like this lot of like kind of like woman talk that I didn't super love. So moving it to kin, I found really helpful. And then my kind of latest one that I mentioned before, this is something I did for one of my classes. The assignment was structure as an extension of the land. So there's a bunch of different metaphors in here. I was really annoyed this assignment for class. I think the metaphor itself was like 5% or something, but I just knew like as I was given the assignment, I want to bead this. I want to look at moving past this idea of like this urban, put it down for a second, like urban res like divide, and the idea that there aren't like Native people in the city, or that cities aren't like inherently Native spaces. I wanted to have like buffalo kin as not only like relations we have on the land, but also would have been kind of crucial for making teepees. And in this, like the teepee that I did, is you would usually take a buffalo skin and you'd sew them together to make the teepee like structure. And so I made it the pride flag to kind of talk about how like the land is always going to be shelter for two-spirit kin. And that even as we're like still trying to reclaim those understandings in our nations, like the land knows that and holds that. So that piece felt very different than my first few. It was the first one that I sketched out. I had all my ideas instead of just doing, actually I'm working on one right now. Like I do a lot of these kinds of like simple, like floral designs that you see kind of a lot of. To the other one, which is very much like my own ideas and little sketching and kind of allowing it to not be perfectly symmetrical, or yeah, allowing for mistakes to happen. And just to touch on community. So I think some of us may know, but like beadwork is a very like, traditional practice for Indigenous people in Turtle Island, and there would have been different beads and materials and like practices depending on your nation. So I know like quill work, I don't think like Cree people would have had that as much. I'm really curious to like learn more about that. Métis like floral beadwork is pretty specific. You'll see like loom beading a little bit more like in the States. Some of these are kind of generalized. So yeah, just like different styles. So I really, my Instagram, I'm trying to follow less people actually, because I don't know, I'm finding it a bit overwhelming, but a lot of people I follow are artists because it's really interesting to see how they put together colors, how they're taking this very like traditional practice and moving it forward. Until we had glass beads with colonization, it would have been like buffalo berry beads or shells turn into beads. Someone was telling me how they used to, she had like a dream about it because she was wondering like, how do you make beads out of this shell? And people would have like rubbed them in the water to create like this rounded bead. And so it's nice to feel connected to this like very old practice and like try to reach into my own culture and find like specific patterns. Like one of the archives are their own topic, but being able to see historically the kind of patterns that people in my nation or my family would have made. I have a few things passed down that I can look at and refer to, but also being able to see what else is out there in the community and kind of create our own. I think for me, beadwork is a good kind of reminder of like culture shifting and people's like responses to that. I know for me, I do a lot of like gender, sexuality, like kind of research with like Two-Spirit folks, and people want a lot of like historical knowledge about our roles, our names, and all things that are like very good and we do want, but sometimes it almost gets to the expectation that if you can't find that in the history, that it's not real, that we're making things up and that it's not traditional. And I always like look to beadwork or like look to people. There's one artist I really like, Antelope Women Designs out of the States, and she just beaded these like Spam like cans earrings, and like some of the like sparkles or gems or like some of the materials, like those aren't traditional in a sense, but we're more okay with that. And I think that's a good reminder that that's the same thing with kind of like Two-Spirit reality. Like sometimes it's going to seem like, oh, this is like new and different, but like it is rooted in tradition. We are allowed to change and shift and like don't always have to find like the beaded Spam cans in some archive to say that we can do it now and it's like legitimate. So yeah, that's kind of what I like about beadwork. And I will say, last thing, a lot of my work, I haven't got to the point where I've sold anything or started doing that. I do want to, and I definitely have some privilege in that I don't have to do that right away. But in my cohort, we're asked to gift knowledge keepers with things whenever we learn something or feel like connected to them. And it's not like we're being marked on it or watched to see like who's gifting what, but often I've made a few little things because I'll bead in class to focus. And then we'll go do some of our land-based teachings and I just end up giving people things. And one of the pins I actually brought to show you, I gave it away at the Two-Spirit gathering this past weekend. It's like the Two-Spirit hieroglyphics for Mi'kmaq folks. And then it just had a pride flag kind of in the background. And I've been carrying it around for about 2 years, like didn't feel like I should wear it. Didn't really know what to do with it. I'd made it kind of as a test piece to do a beadwork workshop. And then I met someone who's going to be walking the red carpet for TIFF, who's an Indigenous filmmaker. And so they're going to be doing that this week. And I was like, great. Like they had some, it's like buffalo hide thing that they were going to wear. And they're like, I really want to put things on it. So I was like, this pin was meant for you. And that is something I really like about my art, is that it doesn't feel extractive in that I'm making things and it's not being valued, and like sometimes I'm not being paid, but it's still, there's this kind of reciprocity. And yeah, I think I really appreciate that.
Yeah, and I think this idea of, creating something and it finding its match or where it belongs a bit later when it's ready. And, when we think about bringing that into perhaps someone's work or science or any kind of, research setting, the idea that there might be some idea there that's, doesn't quite seem to fit, but allowing it some space or exploring might end up pointing you in the direction where you find that match and you say, oh, this is how the pieces fit together. I think this really nicely flows into talking to Jen a little bit about, materials, because we're talking, we're mentioning the beads and what they used to be made of, and then also, what they're made of now. Jen, you work with plastics. I'm hoping you can tell us perhaps a little bit about some of the ethics of those found materials and how you may have special considerations around, what you're doing and then, the message that you're telling with those pieces.
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's a really good question. There are the ethics around it is complicated. It's not just as simple as marine debris is bad, I should collect it all and get rid of it. Because for one thing, I'm a settler, and so I need to not assume myself entitled to access land in order to collect marine debris. And also, so often it's integrated into the landscape. There could be creatures growing on plastic items, and it could be embedded in layers of sediment. Recently, I found a rope that was embedded in layers of a sand dune and preventing erosion. So it would not be good to remove that. And if creatures are living on the thing, then it's not great to remove that because it would kill the creatures. And so since it's not possible to remove all of the plastic from the ocean, I don't feel like if I see that object there and, well, it's got a creature living on it, I don't think I need to remove it. I'll go remove some other plastic. There's no shortage. And then so I think about plastic as kind of an invasive species. And I think about settler colonialism as a kind of invasion. It is an invasion. So settlers as a kind of invasive species on Turtle Island. And so as a settler, I'm trying to think about how I can work with this other invasive species to be more responsible to the land where I live here in Mi'kma'ki, and to the more than human kin around me, because it's not enough to just say, oh, I'm kin with all of these creatures. I have to actually learn how to do that when my settler colonial culture has taught me not how to do that. And so working with plastic is a way of trying to enact a material responsibility, and to think of that material and how it wants to, what it's trying to become. So rather than just thinking of it as a problem that we need to get out of sight, out of mind, put it in a landfill where it will, not really be gone because someday that landfill is going to be underwater or who knows, but to think of it as a potential material collaborator, because in the context where it is drifting around the ocean, it's harmful, but in a different context, it could be helpful or at least less harmful. And because plastic it lasts, we don't know how long it lasts, it may outlive us as a species, it is part of the future. And so we need to think about how we want it to be a part of the future rather than just trying to shove it aside. Was there another part of your question that I've forgotten?
No, I think that, it was more about thinking about those found materials. And then I guess you could continue it on to mention maybe a few words about once you've created something, or maybe in your process, is there a consideration for like what message you're going to tell with the piece that you're working on?
Yeah, so it's more about me trying to see what stories, what messages are contained in the objects themselves, and then figuring out a way to amplify that, rather than me having a message I want to portray and then trying to gather the materials to form them to my view. And so I've got a few examples here of items that have obviously have stories embedded in them because of their interaction with animals, things with bite marks. This is a margarine lid, and it's full of little holes bitten by animals. And this sole of a shoe, all around the edge is all of bite marks. People have been nibbling all around the edge. And this other lid with some tooth punctures. This bottle has a bite out of it. There's also, when you find, I find a lot of balloons, which is one item that I find really interesting, because when people release balloons, it's usually kind of a hopeful, joyous, uplifting kind of event. Of course, there are the like mass balloon releases that are just, some big celebration, but there are also sometimes people will write a message to someone who has died, and then they're imagining sending that message to heaven. And I have found balloons that have messages written on them. And on the one hand, I don't want to say to somebody that you shouldn't do that sort of thing that makes you feel connected with your lost kin. But on the other hand, there's evidence that the message doesn't reach heaven. And I wonder how we could think about that material and what it's becoming next. But anyway, so I don't want to make any judgments against somebody writing a message to someone they've lost, but it is really interesting to find balloons that have messages written on them and think about what was the person experiencing when they wrote this, and who was the person who the balloon was sent to, and what path did it take through the atmosphere before it landed in the water, and then what path did it take before I found it, and did it interact with any other creatures? And so all of those things are stories embedded in the object. And so I made this little booklet with pictures of balloons. I don't know if you can see it, that I've found. The pictures throughout the booklet are all balloons in the various places where I found them. And then the book is bound with ribbon from a balloon that I found. And I've made a whole series of them, and they're all bound with ribbons from marine debris balloons. And it's kind of I'm not really putting forward a clear message that releasing balloons are bad, because on one hand, there's like this lovely one where it's, to Mary, we wish you were here. We miss you so much. Uncle Dennis, we miss you. Like these.
Yeah. And it's fascinating how, in doing that, you're allowing people to unearth that message by taking them to a place. And I think that really, this is a perfect juxtaposition of people speaking, because I think Brittany's going to talk a little bit about sort of the ethics of collective consent and decision-making. So I'm going to hand it over to you now to speak about that. And in the meantime, we're going to have a couple of minutes for audience questions. If there are none, I will just ask a few more questions to bring us home here. But if you have a question, you can either raise your hand or type it in the chat. Now's the time. Brittany, you can take it away for a few minutes, and then we'll come back to if any questions come in.
Thank you so much, Sam. And thank you to Jen, Dr. Jenna, and Naomi. It's so great listening to everything that you folks are doing. I thought that I wouldn't have anything to contribute here, but I'm finding so many layers that and similarities, and it's been great listening to how you're thinking about your practices. So one thing I forgot to mention earlier is that the CLEAR Lab is directed by Dr. Max Lieberone, and they are an artist and scientist at Memorial University. And in talking to them before this panel today, they were saying, they said something that bringing artists into the lab, it's not just add diversity and stir, like it's the art and the creative process is part of the method, and it's embedded, which is something that Jen was saying as well, is that like art is a method in itself, which I think is really powerful. But talking about how CLEAR gets the whole lab participating in and interacting with creative methods, it's with collective consent. So we had a bunch of projects in the past, but most notably the Knowledge Quilt and the Soundscape project, I think really emphasize how we bring everyone in together, and how we do this through collective consent and collective decision making. So everyone in the lab is involved in the creative process right from the beginning. So collective consent is where the whole lab gets together to discuss a project proposal, and we work through any tensions together as a collective until everyone involved consents to the project on behalf of themselves, other people present, and absent lab members. So if the proposed project doesn't reach a point where everyone consents, then it doesn't happen, which may sound like a failure, but it's not. It's still useful because everyone learns about the ethics of making consent, and there's still collaboration and relationship building every step of the way. So in that way, this process is still good and useful, even though it may sound like the boring, less fun side of art. It's still a really important part of the process, and yeah.
And I think that will be something that is particularly interesting for science folks who are really sitting in, a strongly science background, perhaps getting into those, relationships, thinking about bringing everyone together as a way to, generate ideas as a group. And you maybe can also alleviate some of the pressure of feeling like you have to come into a project and know and bring everything to the table. It really is a group effort, whether that's all people or also considering, non-human kin, if you're interacting with the land or animals or your field site or wherever that may be. So we do have a question in the chat here from Rachel. Does anyone want to make a quick comment on how do you communicate, present, or share your work, or find the community to share with and learn from? We have a couple of minutes for a quick response if anyone would like to field that.
I can speak maybe to the latter part of the question, and I found it really interesting. Often when you think of being a writer, you think of, going to literary festivals or speaking with authors groups or what have you. I find one of the most interesting ways in my own experience to find community to share with and learn from has been through food. And this has been something that's the part of my life, working on the land and growing food with my community. How many people have creative expressions that come out of discussions with growing respectfully wild harvesting and sharing food together? So I find that as a writer, part of my literary world is, through the literary festivals and things, but I've also found a really rich and diverse creative community through people who come out to the farm here and want to grow food or share food or harvest food or, preserve food together, and have various ways of showing creativity through that, and who might bring their stories, might bring artwork, might want to use some of the materials here in the creation of artwork. And so that's been a really unexpected way of building community and like a broader creative community instead of just the writing community. That's been unusual, and I've been really valuing that this year.
Oh, that's wonderful. And unfortunately, we're like at the end of our hour, but I think, we could talk forever. We had so many ideas for topics. So hopefully these little snapshots have given folks things to think about. I think ending on this idea of the unexpected being a generative place will be particularly valuable for the scientists in the crowd, because, we're going to the field and sometimes it's those unexpected moments that you can bring to other people and really make that emotional connection. So to summarize, I just want to say, we've talked about a lot of concepts in art, consent, assumed access, permission, materials, the role of the land, bringing your community and culture, your own value system to your work, thinking about identity and how you fit in as an artist, and also those relationships and perhaps solitude or not solitude. And I think all of those concepts are things that researchers and scientists can use in their science work and also in their artistic endeavors. So with that, I need to give it back to Alexa. Sorry, we cannot speak for longer, but I do so much appreciate everything that the panelists have generously shared with us today. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Sam, and our tech support GAE, who's been alive and well in the background. Of course, thank you to all of our panelists and our attendees for such an enriching conversation. We really hope you enjoyed the session, and we hope that you'll consider getting started with your own creative practices if you haven't already. So if you are interested in expressing interest in submitting a piece of work for the Art Science Showcase, one of the QR codes is there. I can add another link in the chat, and there's a second QR code for more about the whole art symbiosis, science art symbiosis programming. If you did enjoy this conversation, we really encourage you to register for our annual meeting, whether you're submitting a piece for the showcase or not, because we'll have time and space to do a little bit of virtual networking, explore all the pieces of artwork, and of course have more of that organic conversation about our work. So I'll leave it there, and I hope that you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much. This is such a pleasure.
Thank you.